I raised myself and cautiously walked outside my room to get into the bathroom. I tried to anticipate my mother's steps to avoid a direct confrontation, because I wanted to gain some extra time to think about how the encounter could pass off. But right at the moment when I activated the lights of the bathroom, the next scene was illuminated, in which she stared right into my eyes. "What are you doing here in the dark?" I said while recuperating from the jump scare. She was equally surprised, while she responded, "I just stood up as well, and I know the bathroom enough to find everything." Without questioning, I continued, "Can I use it then?" "Of course." When she walked past me, I got shaken by terrible goosebumps, which were triggered by a subtle disturbance. I knew her well enough to claim that the remains of yesterday were still affecting her. Once more, I had no clue how to describe it. I only had the feeling, describing the effect she had on me rather than referring to a certain behavior. But however, without letting myself getting spooked too much, I proceeded and brought my preparation to an end before leaving shortly after. My mother's awkward tone when she said goodbye still echoed within my head when I drove to school, but in this regard I just hoped it would disappear when different thoughts were being added. The stress itself, or the stressed out people, would most likely represent a promising remedy to all that, even though it was such only temporarily. But I could live with it, as I preferred the more or less pleasant stress over the unpleasant calm anyway. And just like that, I terminated the school day without shining too much as regards my own highs and lows. Neither toward my friends, nor toward someone else. The only person I probably would have informed about what was somehow inhibiting me was Chloe, but my day was way too packed to insert an excursion of that kind. I had plenty of things to work on, so that when we found each other together again, there was nothing standing in between. Apart from the first two subjects I had already cared for, I set myself the intention to include one subject each day, so that I was equipped well for any circumstance showing up. It was a matter of fact that everything could change in an instant, so I wanted to stay as flexible as possible. The time I normally would have spent idly was therefore used to prepare school stuff, basically the only occupation except for the thing with Chloe and my parents. In this regard, the kind of stress or pressure emerging was pretty much supporting my cause and could therefore be termed eustress, the constructive version of such unpleasantries. Of course, I also made my experience with the other side, the so-called distress, which kind of acts destructively and rather makes you behave inefficiently. Alone my thoughts could be taken as an example. Every time I thought about possible outcomes, I tied myself to that state, while being stuck there and not moving forward at all. But now, as I was not only thinking but acting, I could see how things appeared smooth again, although it was everything but relaxing. This prolific side of stress really helped me getting over and done with so much, and above all, bestowed me with the faith that everything was going to be fine after all. So overall, I had the paradigm. The tension between my parents and me would resolve at some point with a positive outcome for everyone involved. The remaining time with Chloe would be spent wisely and in joy, leading up to an everlasting joyous period no one of us would ever forget, wherever our path may lead us. And the abitur I would also pass in the end, as I really worked hard to achieve that. I didn't know how I came to that conclusion, but it didn't matter whatsoever. As long as I achieved a good result, the way leading up to it became way less important. Furthermore, by being situated in that state with the according mindset, I averted relapsing into old patterns of worry and concern regarding present and future. I namely learned that focusing on the here and now brings the best results for the present and future alike. But anyway, in the end I had a reason to be proud of myself on that day, as I did justice to my plan and indeed prepared one more subject entirely, so that only a few further ones remained. Thereby I accomplished to have more days than subjects left to prepare, which prompted me to take deep relaxing breaths, testifying my optimism. Although I was gradually becoming the ruler of my mind, I couldn't avert thinking at least a little bit of the incident with my parents. I couldn't entirely get rid of the assumption that I did something wrong, because I was still programmed to the conclusion. When someone else feels bad due to me, then I made a mistake, disregarding the background. Albeit I simultaneously derived that there may be exceptions. When friends or a couple acknowledge that they don't share a common path anymore, or maybe never did, then it is for their highest good to actively deal with that problem, as it opens a new, happier path for both of them. And first of all, they receive the chance to learn from their evident failure, to bond with someone that turned out to be not the perfect match they probably longed for. When one speaks with the other about the logical consequence, namely a separation, then it can conclude in the most devastating part of some people's lives. But in the end, that is the truth, the blessing in disguise that makes them likely evolve personally, prompting them to become happier and more fulfilled after all, whereas further persisting in the counterfeit of a relationship would certainly become more destructive with every day. And so it was in my case. When I had hidden the topic of the dying girlfriend, then it would have struck back at some point and resulted in a much greater disruption than it actually did. All in all, I was able to tap into the certainty that I acted for the favor of everyone, even though that was as yet not shown directly. And exactly with that positivity and motivation I tore myself together when I heard my dad's voice when he came back from work. I could imagine how he likely felt, but at the same time didn't neglect my own feelings, which led ultimately to some kind of bipolarity. But that wasn't too bad, as I managed to maintain the pure shape of every state. Nonetheless, it was strange to shout out the good evening salute toward him, because I thereby acted like nothing happened. But on the other side, my intention was anyway to let him take the next step, as I had fulfilled my duty up to that point. So while we had dinner, I attentively looked at each of them, just waiting for something to happen, to write the next chapter, so to speak. But except for their loud munching, I perceived nothing. I just concluded that they were exceptionally hungry, as it was not too far-fetched after what happened on the previous evening. But since I was hungry as well, it didn't weigh me down too much. Even the warmed-up food tasted delicious. Later on, when we had eradicated anything edible, my father got a little bit intimidated into his day of work, and that was at the same time the only thing being mentioned. When that had flattened out, I intended on going into my room again, but before, I asked whether or not I could be of help at anything. As a result, they just weirdly shook their heads, so I stood up and walked toward the exit of the kitchen. Aaron, wait. Actually, there's one thing. Wrapped in chills, I turned around, because the mood of my dad already gave hints what the matter likely was about. I planned on talking with you right after I came home. In fact, we wanted, but I guess hunger was stronger. He tried to resolve the dense air with a little laugh, which worked partly, as everyone smiled halfway. I anticipated his next step, in which he most likely entreated me to take a seat, when I walked back to them and reoccupied the chair I was sitting on. Evasion, by the way, was never an option. Although I certainly would have found a way to escape somehow, I saw the liability on my side to resolve it for good. The status quo was surely only a phase that had to be cleared as fast as possible, even when it meant to confront the shadows once again. However, while I was sitting on the opposite side of my parents, gazing at them, I waited for the continuation, which occurred not much later. The way we reacted, we did it not because of you or Chloe, but solely due to the circumstance that is important. Even though it is so damn hard for us to endorse what you're doing, or rather, with whom you do it, it is still our duty and will alike to support you as much as we can. The things you explained, well, apart from the usual girlfriend part, I thought you were joking, but otherwise, it just made more sense with every sentence you added. During this part of my dad's explanation, I was reminded of a similar situation, in which I was in my parents' shoes. So as a result, I couldn't help but smile due to that parallel, even though it might have appeared strange. I just combined it with empathetic nodding to indicate that I was following him. Although we felt that something was up, we could never have reckoned with something like that. We rather presumed that you had some difficulty at school, which admittedly would have been a little bit more pleasant. But anyway, Fact is that you as adolescent have to learn how to be independent from your parents' or others' decisions. And therefore I suggest that you think about it again and then decide. Attain a clear mind and reconsider everything. Be certain about the consequences, particularly as you're dealing with something that can turn out to be very destructive as regards your abitur or even your life in general. You know, many people have been disappointed because they chose the way of love. As his speech ended, I needed a couple of moments to process everything. But when I ultimately did, I had to admit that I predicted the outcome, my parents' presumed reaction, utterly wrong, as my dad tried to behave quite reasonable, though I did not at all agree with his last sentence. Many people are being disappointed because they veer off the way of love, not because they choose it. However, I looked at him and thanked him for his statement, as it took a massive load off my mind. The confrontation ultimately was more pleasant than I thought it would be, and therefore I was fairly relieved. I thanked my parents explicitly for their comprehension, and declared myself ready to answer further questions when needed. My aim was to eradicate everything unclear as fast as possible, and in this regard I was certain that more would follow, so it was favorable to provide a loose end for them to hold on to. After all, they likely had millions of questions regarding the girlfriend of their son and her unpronounceable destiny. Though it was not of relevance just yet, it would be short-term. Also because I wanted to introduce Chloe to them, as vibrant and wonderful as she was. Not at all when we were standing in front of her grave, recapitulating memories, but actually doing that through creating new ones.